Okay, hi everyone. This is Rachel from MENA S&R, and today we have a real treat. We have a scholar who is not only going to tell us about his work and how he got to it and all the fascinating things he's found, but he's also a member of our steering committee. We have Alper with us today. Alper, as is my tradition, I'm going to ask you to please introduce yourself, as I am notoriously terrible at giving introductions. So we're really looking forward to hearing more about you today, why you chose to study what you study, how you chose to study what you study, what life path brought you there, why it's important, maybe any advice you have to offer other researchers out there. But so there's a lot to cover in the discussion ahead. So, you can start wherever you want to start, but maybe first just tell us a little bit who you are, where you are.
Okay.
Things along those lines.
Thanks for having me. I'm Alper Bilgili. So right now I am a sociologist of science, but I started my career in political science. And then I studied political science like 10 years. And then when I was an exchange student at Amsterdam, I took some courses from sociology and anthropology departments. And then I said, wow, this is the way I should go. I should continue my career in. And then
wait, I'm sorry to stop you already, but can you tell us a little bit more about that moment? What was it about sociology and anthropology that gave you that, feeling that this is something that was calling your name as opposed to the political science that you had been pursuing until then? I don't know, just my curiosity getting the better of me. And
that's a fair question. Actually, I think what fascinated me about sociology is that it's more about the fundamentals. So politics is kind of a reflection of that fundamentals. There are certain things in society that do not change or change slowly. So I was familiar with sociology, of course, when I was studying political science. But for example, when I read Putnam and his study on Italy, so he compares northern and southern parts of Italy, and then says that we have same institutions here, we have same laws here, but the things work very differently in the northern and southern parts of Italy. That should be about something else. So that should be about, for example, the another kind of capital that we are not really referring to, which is called social capital, for example. So when I read things like this, I have this idea that we're putting too much emphasis on political science, on institutions, but we're not really thinking about the real tenets behind it, the real, factors behind it. So sociology gave me that perspective, and I was studying anti-system parties when just before quitting studying political science, and then I saw that that's too much detail, and I don't want to. I'm not really interested in that kind of detail. Uh, Besides, I was interested in natural sciences, and then sociology seems like a great place to study natural sciences to me because um, well, as a Turk, this might be more interesting for us. But the idea here is that so we in our culture, natural sciences are glorified, and it's almost sacred, and in some instances, it's more sacred than the sacred. So thinking about how society and how social factors or psychological factors have an impact on uh, the natural sciences was a great interest. So it was surprising to learn that, oh, wait, natural sciences doesn't have to be that objective. And when you read history of science, you see that people are influenced by their culture, by their gender, by their political stance. when they evaluate scientific facts. So it also increased my interest in sociology. And then I decided to quit my PhD, which was, you know, I well, that was a hard decision to take because you spend 3 years for a PhD and then you suddenly say, I will start a new one because, there was other pressures. We're not just academics. And then I studied a new one. And this time I knew what I was going to study. So I decided to study sociology of science. And that was my first, important career change. And then in 2014, uh, I visit Leeds, University of Leeds for postdoc. And then there I had a chance to study with Greg Reddick and John Topham. And those guys I really admire their work. Greg Reddick, for example, was the editor of Cambridge Companion to Darwin. So what I see is that in order to be a good sociologist, you have to be a good historian. So you need to read history a lot, as you know. So I started reading history of sciences, and then what I see is that I think I love history more than I love sociology. So this time I didn't quit sociology, but I also spent so much time on reading about history of science. So my latest publications since then are mostly focused on history of science, and I publish in history of science journals. And my books also have that, as the focus. Uh, yeah, that's basically my career.
So how would you explain again this shift from sociology to history? I mean, you didn't give us, I don't think, the detail yet on what your PhD, your postdoc, your topics have been after in history and things like that. But
well, as I said, I mean, if you look at sociologists, Marx, Weber, Durkheim, they're all great historians as well. Because in sociology we have a limited sample, and you need to go back in history and try to find cases from there and then utilize them. So that was one reason. But in my case, let me put it this way: in Turkey, again, um, history of science is very fundamental because the role attached to science is quite crucial. And it's not just about discovering nature or using it in order to develop some technology. It has this symbolic meaning. It's like a compass, it's like the real guide or the sole guide in humanities to show you the right path, and the rest is just meaningless. So I don't want to sound anachronistic, but it's like the scientism today, especially in the late 19th century. Ottoman intellectuals, many of them, not all, were thinking that only science can solve our problems. So they read history, they read Western history, and then they concluded that we need to have a similar fight in our society. So they are mostly French read. They were reading in French, and they were interested in French history. And then there's this, in France, there's a clash in the Ancien Regime. So the Enlightenment, and then there's this dark forces of religion and tradition, that kind of a narrative. And they also they bought that narrative, and then they try to implement it in the Turkish case. Although the story is quite different in the Turkish case because we didn't have a church-like organization. Uh, Ottoman Empire was not a theocracy in that sense. So the ruler has the real authority over religious institutions. Anyways, this is too much detail, but so I think that was important for the late Ottoman intellectuals. Also, it was important for early Republican elites, which were, by the way, some were the same people. So those became important figures in the early days of Republic, and then they wrote books, sociology books, history books, which were shaped by that religion versus science mentality. So in the Turkish history, in the last 2 centuries, we see that kind of, the image of science is like it gained this sacred status, and it gained it for many people at the expense of religion, right? So science is becoming the guide, which means the old guide, which used to be religion, should be left alone. I mean, people should not be religious anymore. That kind of mentality was dominant for at least for some elites in the last 2 centuries. So I was interested in history in that sense as well, because history is shaping, this is recent history, and it shapes our books. Therefore, it shapes our education, it shapes our society. So, you need to know what happened in the last 2 centuries to understand Turkey today. Even the recent elections have something to do with that. So, therefore, if you're writing about sociology of science in Turkey, you need to read about what happened in Turkish history, also what happened in the Western history, because Turkish history is fundamentally shaped by Western discussions as well. Yeah, so that's the brief answer to your question. In my postdoc, I studied, well, I wrote 2 articles during my postdoc. One is published in the British Journal for the History of Science. It was about an Ottoman intellectual, İsmail Fenni Ertuğrul. And then İsmail Fenni Ertuğrul was a late Ottoman intellectual. And then he believed that the theory of evolution was wrong. But he also stated that in order to prove it wrong, we need to use philosophy, we need to use sciences. We can't just refer to our sacred texts. So in that way, I mean, the way he thinks was quite Western, right? And he refers to Western resources to question the validity of Darwinism. And then he also said, there is nothing fundamentally wrong about Darwinism in terms of Islam. So he also stated that as a religious person, I don't agree with this theory because it's not scientific. But he also said there is nothing anti-Islam about this theory. And then he dwells in Quran and other sources and try to show that those verses could be interpreted in this way as well. So there's no problem. And then thirdly, he also said that evolutionary theory, although was not a problem in terms of Islam, it could blur the distinction between man and the animals, the animal kingdom, and therefore could lead to disasters like wars, and could affect people's lives. So this is a very sophisticated and nuanced view on evolution at the time, at least. And then he also said, if our knowledge changes, Muslims should be ready to interpret Quran in that way. So he wasn't, and in a way, he's more open-minded than many Muslim intellectuals of today. And then, so it was a very good article, I think, because the topic was interesting, because most of the time we just focus on extremes When I say extremes, I'm not saying there are just a few people like that, of course. But so we either focus on materialist Ottoman thinkers, and then we say, okay, and then there's this reaction, fundamentalist, how should I put it, religious camp, which is against, scientific views like evolution. And then you also have people like Ismail Fendi who respect science, who believes science is very important, and who was also critical of materialists. So there are people like that, and I wanted to show that. And the second article I wrote during my postdoc was, this time I look at Darwin's views on Ottomans. So in the Turkish anti-evolutionist camp, people are using Darwin's views against Turks, which was, of course, negative because he was a Victorian, and for many Victorians, they were not very, sympathetic of Turks at the time, and he was a standard Victorian in that sense. But people read too much into it, and then some even argued that Darwin was working for British state, British government, and they have this secret, agreement, so that Darwin would come with this theory, and then he would say you can also apply this to human worlds, and then so that we can use it and we can legitimize our conquer of the Ottoman land, that kind of theory. By the way, of course, some colonizers used Darwin's theory to legitimize their position. I'm not saying it didn't happen, but it's like people, I mean, being used by something is different than being a partner of it, right? So they are like, Darwin was a secret agent of those colonizers. So I tried to show that this was the standard opinion at the time among Victorians. And then I also try to show that I look at Darwin's library and I try to find and search every book that may have a reference to Turks in those books, so that I make sure that what Darwin gained his views, the sources Darwin shaped his views by are explained in my paper, so that he doesn't have a secret agenda. That was the normal thing for a Victorian to do. And then, yeah, so a few years ago, this time I wrote another paper, again for British Journal for the History of Science. This time, this is about Turkish, how should I put it, how Turkish historians explain science in the Islamic world. So in a way, it's a meta-historical article. And then how they used history to legitimize certain positions, to defend certain positions, or to support certain positions. Like, for example, the Turkish materialists are reading history from a different perspective. Turkish Islamists are reading history of science from a different perspective. And then, so I wrote the history of their history, their understanding of history, and how it also affects today's discussions. For example, today, even the museums created by certain institutions are shaped by these changes. I mean, the government changes, and then you started to focus on pre-Islamic era, and then try to find links. And then, or you may say that, so this is very interesting because, in the pre-Islamic history of Turks, we don't know many things about it. It's, at least we don't know what they think about science. So, for example, some secular Turks try to find solution by saying that, what, it was the Turkish Muslims who were more influential in bringing this Islamic golden age into life. So in a way, it's again a Turkish accomplishment. So I try to understand how history of science could be used for championing certain ideologies in that paper. And I have some books written again in those lines. Some were popular in, of course, in this field. For example, like if your books are sold more than, I don't know, 5,000 copies in Turkey in history of science genre, you would say that's a popular one. And another thing I try to do is I don't want to limit my discussions, so I don't want them to be uh, discussions only among academics. I want the larger public to learn about those as well. So I try to talk on national TV channels, and I don't know, sometimes give interviews to Turkish dailies. Sometimes I write pieces, opinion pieces to Turkish dailies, daily newspapers. So that's, I think, the way I try to share my knowledge with the larger public about those issues. That's me in a nutshell.
Wow, well, that's a lot. I mean, you bring together so many important strands of these fields of inquiry, having both the historical basis, the sociological perspective, and the interest in politics. So yeah, I am kind of interested a little bit if we've already made it to the present now. So, and I know you have both facets of your work, that you're in the academy, you're teaching as a, you're teaching sociology to students, and you're also in the public sphere. So I'm just sort of curious about the difference. What are you encountering, or first of all, what's important for you to give over in these different areas where you work, and sort of what are the different challenges or pushback that you find in both places, or what are the key issues right now, and how are you engaging with them, I guess, is sort of my question.
Well, I think the biggest challenge I face is the practical one. I don't have much time to do anything else because I'm teaching so many lectures, so many courses, which is really hard to do anything else. So I have a friend who is working in finance, and sometimes he asks me, "Did you read this book? It's just published." I'm like, "No, it's in my list, but I don't have time to read it." And then he already read it, and sometimes I question myself because I'm doing this job to read more, to write more, and then I see my friend in finance has more time to read it. Well, that's sad, and I don't know how to solve this practical problem, but that's a very important one. Just today, my editor is forcing me to finish my new book. And then I say, I don't have much time to do that because we also do some, for example, yesterday we had this big organization in Istanbul. Richard Swinburne was here, Rodney Holder of Faraday Institute was here. So we try to organize other activities to, again, reach the larger public who are interested in those topics as well. So that's the biggest problem, practical reasons. And secondly, yeah, of course, Turkey is very polarized. The polarization in Turkey is quite strong. Therefore, people could be very emotional when you're saying something they don't like. And sometimes it's safe to just choose one side in a discussion. I'm sure you have a similar problem in Israel personally. Sometimes it's safe and, comfortable to choose one over the other. But you're like, as a social scientist, you have to say, you know, you have to be nuanced, and then you say, yes, what he said is wrong, but this part is right. When you say things like that, people are like, oh, now you're defending him. You're like, no, no, no, I'm not defending him. I think he's wrong, but this was. So people are not, many people, not all, of course. People could be emotional and critical of what you say instead of trying to consider whether you're right or wrong. Of course, you can be wrong. Maybe it's black and white, maybe it's not nuanced. But the way they evaluate your opinions are not uh, complicated. It's just they just look at it and then try to place you in one camp, which is quite problematic for a social scientist. Uh, of course, the institutions are sensitive about those issues as well. I mean, you say something and then someone is being critical of you, and then the institution you're working for is becoming more, I don't know, uh, they are like, maybe you shouldn't talk about this anymore. Or maybe they don't say it out loud, but you feel that they are not happy about it. So that's another problem, to be living in such a polarized society. Um, and I think, other than that, there are, of course, financial problems, as you can guess. Books are expensive, articles are expensive, trying to attend conferences are expensive. So, and Turkish economy is not in the heyday of its history. So, we have some problems, economic problems, which is reflected on academics as well. Yeah, those are the problems. Of course, there are problems about, again, sometimes students may not be happy about what you're teaching. But I don't really care about that part of the question, because I mean, they are students for a reason. They are there to learn. Even if, this is what I say to my students, you don't have to agree with what me or what your other professors say. What you need to do is try to understand, if you're going to criticize, still you need to understand it. Um, Even if you are graduated in the same position, in the same place, in the same stance, political stance, you need to be more sophisticated compared to like 4 years ago, right? This is what I say. And most of the time, what I see is that they are changing a lot in time. They are becoming more and more, nuanced and sophisticated, and they are more open to listen to what others say, even if they don't agree with it at all. Yeah, these are the problems.
Well, that's the rewarding part of teaching and being involved in higher education. So what is your new book about that your editor is nudging you about?
Actually, it's not a new book.
Oh,
It's an old book with a new edition. But in a way, it's a new book because I am putting too much energy in it to revise it, and this is going to be published in a new publisher, by a new publisher. Therefore, and the cover is going to change. The sources are going to be added. So it's it takes too much energy and time to do all these things. Therefore, it feels like a new book, but it's not a new one. So it's called "What Science Is Not," and it's a critical evaluation of the new atheism through a the analysis of a Turkish new atheist, which is a great scientist. He's a great geologist. This guy is very successful in the international arena as well. But when he talks about religion, history, and politics, he's becoming, how should I put it, disappointment. At least I can put it that way, I think. So I was being critical of his views about science, not his views about his field, of course, but the way he, um, how should I put it? The way he understands science, the role he attaches to science, and again, the way he tries to uh, clash science with religion. So I'm critical of those positions, which is a typical new atheist in that sense. Yeah, and it's that was the most popular book I've ever written. People like it, and I every day I have emails saying that I'm really waiting for that book. So unless someone is trolling me, it's going to be a good success, I hope.
Wow, great. Probably people want you to do debates and all of those things.
Yeah, yeah. I'm not a very debate guy, by the way. I don't. I mean, I write because I think debates are demagogues are good in debates, right? Uh, but writing is different. It's slow. You read it, you digest it, you try to understand it, and then you look at the other side. So it's more balanced and I think more healthy. But the other one is about demagogues. For example, let's assume that I don't have any social fears, but you have social fears, but your arguments are stronger. And then, I mean, I find this point that will make you angry or, I don't know, shy. Then I talk about it. I talk about it. So it's good for demagogues. But yeah, sometimes I'm been in those kind of debates on TVs, but that's not really something I like. Not because I'm a bad demagogue, by the way.
So I'm happy to hear about any other particular points in your work that you'd like to share, or anything else that you think that's important for either new researchers coming into the field, thoughts you have for them, advice from your own experience and work, or whatever you think would be a great place to bring the conversation now.
Well, I think the cliches are so strong about science and religion. So no matter what we write, we need more. So we need more analysis which shows that the picture is more complicated. It's not that simple. This is an ideological, reading of history, and it's not healthy. It's not helping anything. I mean, we just saw that during COVID-19 or the last, a few months ago, we had this earthquake, terrible earthquake in Turkey. What we see is that we need science, uh, and we need science a lot. So science is helpful. Therefore, trying to create and science needs allies. This is what I say in one of my interviews on a Turkish daily. So science is about science needs allies. It doesn't need uh, fabricated enemies like religion. So if you want to persuade people about vaccine, you need religious authorities as well, right? Because religious authorities can persuade people about having that vaccine, for example. So uh, we need allies. We don't need fabricated enemies. This is one thing. And Elaine Eklund writes about those issues a lot, and she also emphasizes this point by creating a false dichotomy between science and religion, you're not helping. If you really like science, if you really like people hear what science says, you need to look at the important institutions in the society and how you can use them to make people listen to science. And religion is, in many societies, is the most important institution that can help you. Of course, the first reason I'm critical of this clash or the idea that science and religion are enemies by nature kind of thinking is that it's not true. And I mean, when you look at history of science, yes, there are certain periods of time religious authorities have problems with what scientists said. But when you look into details, most of the time politics is there. So, and also you see certain periods, and this is the majority of time, I think, religious institutions and authorities are not uh, against science. On the opposite, on the contrary, what you see is that sometimes people in the history of humanity, when you think about, for example, natural theology, there are periods people see scientific knowledge as a source that can contribute to their knowledge about God and religion. Like Newton, for example, when I read his book titled Optics, you know, it's one of the most important books of history of science. And then in that book, he's talking about very technical questions. And at the end, he says, you know, by learning about all these, we can be good, you know, people like Noah and his sons, so we become good people in the eyes of God as well. So he took all that technical information and then said and related to religious, you know, behavior, being a good person, and then in the eyes of God, you know. So it's a it's a it's a big tradition in the Western history, and then I also would like to show that reading the Dawkinsian reading of history of science is not true. It's not true. It's not helping. So therefore, we need to write more about those topics. So we need new young generations to persuade careers in this field. And I think the best way to help them is to write good articles and books so that set a good example, and then that's what we're trying to do.
So if people want to find more of your work and follow more of what you're doing, what's the best way for them to get the information?
I think academia is the best way to follow my work. Academia account, and I'm using it actively, and then I also use Twitter, uh, so they can also find me there. Yeah, those are the sources, two sources that they can learn about the updates. There's also alperbilgili.com, but that's mainly in Turkish. So for Turkish followers, they can also follow my webpage.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Alper, very much for giving us, first of all, the overview on your career, your trajectory, and how you got into all of these different disciplines, which make our field so interdisciplinary: the history, philosophy, sociology, anthropology of science. It sounds like it's been an exciting life so far. So looking forward to see where life continues to take you. I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to add, or if we should just sign off. Or
Yeah, I started playing drums a few months ago, so looking for a new career change.
music is in the future.
Yeah, why not?
You could upload a video to academia.edu of the
on,
drum
YouTube,
recital.
on YouTube, probably. Yeah, I will do.
Okay, well, thank you very much for your time today.
Thanks for having me.
Lord, take care.
Bye.